Hello there, Michelle Short here for My Favourite Things. Today I have a clean and simple anniversary card to share with you, so let's get started. This is the I'm So In Love With You Still set. It's absolutely adorable. I love all of the different critters in this set, and they're all kind of in love. And although I don't personally have a need to make a huge amount of Valentine's cards, what I really love about sets that are more geared towards Valentine's is that you can use them for anniversary cards or wedding cards, lots of different occasions, which is really nice. So I'm taking the two little bears hanging on the swings, or sitting on the swings I should say, hanging from the clouds, which I just thought was adorable. So I'm stamping both of those images and also the little hearts there as well. I'm just going to stamp those with some black ink, stamping that twice so that I get a really nice impression, and then I'm going to colour the images with Copic markers. So the markers that I'm using are on the screen here. I'm doing very simple Copic colouring today, as I usually do. So I'm starting off by colouring in the clouds. I just want a very basic kind of aqua colour on these. I don't want them to be kind of too vibrant. So I'm using BG11. And then I'm going to blend that out with BG10, and I'm focusing majority of the colour on either side. So I want the images to be lighter in the middle and then darker on either opposite side. I'm then going to take the colourless blender and I'm just going to blend that out so that I don't get any harsh edges, but the side towards the middle is going to end up staying white. And that's what's really great about that colourless blender. It doesn't really blend colours, but it does remove it, and that helps with blending out to white. It does take a little while for Copic markers to dry, to evaporate all of the alcohol. So one tip I have found is that you want to leave that to evaporate completely before you decide if you want to add any more colour on top, because what it looks like when it's wet isn't necessarily what it's going to look like when it's dry. I'm then going to colour in the bears, and I'm actually using the exact same shades that I used on my last video, so I am going to speed this up quite a bit. This is the E59. I'm going in with my darkest shade. I really love these colours for bears in particular. Really kind of a warm brown, but not too warm, if that makes sense. I'm then going to blend out that darkest shade with the E57 and just blending that darkest shade out and bringing the colour more towards the centre of the image. I'm then going in with the E55 and blending that out even more. And then I'm going to go in with the E53 just to add a small amount of that just towards the tips of their feet and the top of their heads. I'm then going in with E12 for their ears. To be honest, I doubt that bears have pink ears, but I thought it looked quite cute. And then for their muzzles or their kind of nose parts, I'm using E55, E53, E51, E50, and then for their tiny little noses, I'm using E49. Then for this one's like top or t-shirt, whatever you want to call it, I thought I'd do some bright pink, so I'm going in with RV66, and I'm also using that colour on those little hearts there as well. I'm blending that out with the RV55, and then I'm going to go in with the RV52, and this is quite a lot lighter, so it does bleach out that middle shade. So I do go back in with the middle shade, and then I also add a little bit more of the darker shade as well. Sometimes it takes a couple of layers to get the look that you want with Copic markers. And then for this bear here, I'm using V17. I do apologise for my head getting in the way. This is such a tiny little area. It was quite difficult for me to see. And my V17 is really juicy, and so it did kind of blob out a little bit. I'm hoping that I can push that back in with the blue shades that I add on the other stripes. So I used the V17, V15 and V12 for the purples, and then the B04, B02 and B00 for the other stripes for the blue. And I did pretty much manage to kind of push that purple back in. For the actual swings, I'm using E79, E74 and E71. And to be honest, these aren't shades that I use a huge amount, but I did want there to be some contrast between both of the browns. And these are kind of like a muted brown, and I think it works quite well for the wood colour of the swings. So again, I'm just blending that out, and again I did blend out a little bit more than I wanted to, so I do go back in with those darkest shades again just to add a little bit more contrast and some more shadows beneath where they would be sitting on the swings. I just think they're absolutely adorable. And I love creating scenes with clouds and skies, so this gave me the perfect opportunity to create a background for this as well. First of all, I'm going to take the I'm So In Love With You Steel Dynamics, and I'm just going to run those through my die cutting machine to die cut the images out. So I can just pop out the pieces there, and they have die cut really nicely, and I'm just going to pop out the inside pieces of those swing strings as well. So next I can work on that background that I was talking about. So I have a panel of white cardstock here that's cut to 4¼ inches by 5½ inches. And I'm taking the Rectangle Extraordinaire stencil and I'm going to place that over the top, secure it in place with some post-it tape, and then I can add some ink blending inside. I'm going to go really pale with my colours today. I thought I'd create kind of like a pastel-y cloudy background. So I'm starting off with Mermaid Lagoon Distress ink at the top, using some ink blending brushes just to blend that on. I have sped this up because although it didn't take too long, I'm going in so light and pale with the shades that it did take me a couple of layers to build up that colour, although I have left it really quite pale as well. So I'm going between the two shades there. The middle shade is Wilted Violet, and then I'm going in with Kitsch Flamingo right at the bottom. So I'm just going between the shades there just so that I get a nice blend. I'm then taking the cloud stencil and I'm actually just going to add some very subtle clouds onto this background. I did want them to be quite subtle, but I did still want a little bit more interest on the background. So I'm taking the Mermaid Lagoon colour again, and I'm just using the residual off the brush to start with, but I thought that I probably did need a little bit more colour. So anytime that I take the brush off the side of the screen, I'm just dabbing the excess ink off onto a piece of scrap paper. So this is going to be really subtle, and to be honest, in the photos you can't even really see the clouds, but in real life they do add that just tiny extra touch of interest. So I'm going to add another cloud in the middle, and for this one I'm using that Wilted Violet colour. And then I'm just going to add one more there at the bottom using that Kitsch Flamingo colour. So just 3 very pale clouds. I wanted the card to kind of look very airy and light. So just finishing up with that cloud there at the bottom. And then the best part with any masking, you get to lift that off, and I really love that crisp white border around the colourful inside ink blending. I think it looks like you've added a separate layer when you haven't actually needed to, which I think is really great for mailing because it's not so dimensional. I do love adding dimension on my cards, but sometimes it's nice to keep them a little bit flatter as well. So I've added some tape runner onto the back of the panel and also some On Point Precision glue. That's just going to help me have a little bit of wiggle time so that I can make sure that I added this panel onto an A2 sized white card base straight. Next, off screen, I have stamped and heat embossed a sentiment from the Itty Bitty Basics set, and I've also die cut that with the Itty Bitty Strips Dynamics. I tend to heat emboss almost all of my sentiments. I did think that this would look quite nice if I just stamped it onto the card on its own, but I did go with that panel. So I did do that off screen because I do that in quite a lot of my videos and you probably don't need to see me do it multiple times. So I just heat emboss that, like I said, cut that into a strip, and I'm just going to add that towards the top of the card, adding that with some foam tape. And then I'm just going to add some foam tape onto the back of my little critters here. I'm adding very tiny little thin strips on the back of where those strings are for the swings. And then I can just take my tweezers and remove the backings of that. While I was messing around trying to get those pieces of foam tape really thin, I did accidentally get a fingerprint in my background. So here I'm just trying to figure out where I can cover it up with that cloud at the top. I did originally think that I was going to have them slightly higher than they ended up being, but because I wanted to cover that fingerprint, I needed to add them a little bit lower, but I think it worked out okay in the end. But that's just what happens sometimes with distress inks because they're water reactive. If you have even just a tiny little bit of moisture on your fingertips, it does react to that moisture, and then you get fingerprints. But never mind, you can usually cover them up. So I've added some foam tape onto the back of the other little bear here, and just figuring out exactly where I want that to be before I press them both down. I've then die cut the heart dynamics in the set. I've cut that 4 times just from some white cardstock. I really didn't want to try and add tiny little bits of foam tape onto the back of these hearts, so I thought the easiest thing to do would be to cut them out multiple times and then I can layer them on top of each other. It was still quite fiddly purely just because they are absolutely tiny, but I think it was still easier than adding that foam tape. If I didn't want to tuck some embellishments underneath the images themselves, I would have done that as well, because it's a great way to be able to add that dimension without having to cut little pieces of foam tape. So I've just layered those up, so that is actually 5 high, and then I can add some more On Point precision glue onto the back of that. I'm just dabbing off the excess glue, and then I can place that in between the 2 bears so it looks like they're in love. Just so cute. And then to finish off, I'm just adding some raindrop embellishments. So I'm adding some small dabs of that On Point precision glue again, and just placing those onto the card. And this is what I meant by I like to have embellishments kind of tucked under images. I just personally quite like that look, but it does mean that I couldn't stack up the die cuts. But if you didn't want to do that, it would be a lot easier with these particular images. So I just placed the raindrops where I wanted them, and then I can add those in place. And that is the card finished for today. I really love that background. It is very subtle with the cloud stencil, but like I said, in real life you can see it a little bit more. Links to the products that I used will be listed in the description bar here on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.